Thank you and good morning. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's interesting, spending 30 years in retail banking, I can honestly say that we sit here today where it is the best of times and indeed the worst of times. And whenever you have that type of a situation that comes together, it is the time for innovation. So the customer experience in retail financial services and indeed in retailing overall is facing the most fundamental change that I've seen since I've been in business. And it's because now via the smartphones that as I'm looking out there, I know you all have, and I'm very, very honored that you're not on them. But at this point in time, I will say it makes that the customer now has risen to the level that is incredibly demanding and incredibly connected. Now, 2 years ago, after having been the vice chair and the CEO for retail banking with Barclays here in the UK and in Europe, I returned back to my home in Seattle. And Seattle, for those of you who have been there, is a very interesting city because it is, in its core business DNA, is entrepreneurialism. Every large company that has come out of Seattle, Boeing, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon, and many others, didn't come about as an industry. They came about as an individual founder. Many of them are still alive to the day, or the family is running that business in its third and fourth generations. So I created CameoWorks, which is designed to basically take West Coast innovation and join it up with those large global companies that we talked about today in my introduction in Paris, London, and New York. Because companies with scale are challenged by launching new ideas. I can say this from having run a big section of a lot of big companies. You are challenged with many, many complexities in running those businesses. And for those of you who have been or who are in a big company, you know what I mean. But on the other end of the spectrum, innovative startups are challenged with getting scale and reaching vast numbers of customers. So what better natural fit between a young entrepreneurial company with disruptive ideas and a more established counterpart? Now, why did I join up with Anthemis? I was actually at an event. Gavin was very nice to invite me to an Anthemis event a few months ago. And I was really intrigued with a couple of things about this group. The first one is that it's at the very heart of this reinvention of what's happening with the consumer. And this is something that is sweeping through retailing, financial services, a number of different consumer areas, but is ripe right now for financial services. And I'm also very intrigued by the way that Anthemis looks at the full lifestyle and life cycle of the transaction. From the time you actually go through the investment, through to advisory services, on to how you help source talent, which I'm going to make some comments later on about. It's not about the technology, it's really about the talent, all the way through to the deals and how they culminate. And I love the vision that Nadeem talked about, where he said the vision is to become the 21st century Berkshire Hathaway company. Now, one of the companies I represent on the West Coast, Brooks Running Shoes, is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. And so I spend a lot of time with them on this whole discussion of Warren Buffett and how he's really focused on a few key tenets that made that company what it is. And I think Anthemis is doing the same, and really not a moment too soon. We have tipped beyond the tipping point now in financial services. I have to say, throughout my career, I was very honored and blessed to be able to do a number of very creative and innovative things in a variety of different spaces. I launched mobile banking at Barclays. We cleaned up internet banking at Barclays. I launched the first in Washington Mutual in Seattle, the first kind of email that came out. 20 years later, I launched it at Barclays. But at any rate, it was very interesting because there was a lot of innovation that happened. But we always talked about this time about the consumer, when the consumer gets more of the power, and that's what's happened today. The balance of power has completely shifted. It has gone from the company that chooses to give information out to the consumer now that will take and have access to virtually a world of information at their fingertips. The thing that has struck me is the convergence of two things. The proliferation of data. I told you I moved back to Seattle 2 years ago. In that time, 90% of the world's data has been created in 2 years. 1/2 of consumers overall have a smartphone. Fine, that's growing, we all know that. The amazing statistic to me, though, is that of those, 1/3 bought their first smartphone in the last year. At that scale, at that pace of change, right now, the tipping point has tipped. Right now is the moment for technology explosion and disruption in financial services. And as a banker, I have to say technology is not the only disruptive and challenging force. And it's not just digital technology. There still are those legacy systems there that we know and love. I had over 1,000 of them in Barclays Retail Bank that still need to be maintained. They're still workhorses. They need to be decommissioned. They need to be upgraded. And all at a time where cost demands to reduce costs are at an all-time high, and trust in the industry is at an all-time low. Regulation is growing in complexity and uncertainty, and indeed, I think the biggest challenge in banking is that growth on the top line in revenues is elusive at best. So whether you are an innovator here, whether you are a funder, or whether you are indeed sitting at a large bank that needs to be and wants to innovate, why? Why do it now? Well, the innovation cycles for scale are very interesting. And I just recently saw a Bain study, and you may all know some of this, but I think you'll find a couple of these statistics surprising. So if I asked you, how long does it take to reach 50 million users? 50 million. For radio, it was 38 years, 2 generations. For the internet, it was 17, 1 generation. For the iPad, it was 1.5 years. And for Google Plus, which I have to say I thought it had kind of a marginal launch at best, Google Plus had 50 million users in 4 months. So if you don't think that the time to innovate is now, the innovations that we are missing right now as we sit and listen here are remarkable. So it's fast. But the question is not why now only, it's how. How do you do it? And if I were back at my old job and I were sitting where you're sitting right now and listening to these speakers, these are 4 takeaways that I would have, and I'll share them with you. Maybe they'll strike a chord. The first one I'll share is this. I know how we all came today because I did it for years. You got that BlackBerry or that smartphone or that Android or whatever your device of pleasure is, and there are 432 emails waiting for you on it, and more racking up as they come along. And you're looking at that next message, and the texts are coming in. But I would just encourage you all, in our ADD world, to today stop, look, listen, and think. Because the thing that in an over-devised world we lose is the time for our brains to process and to think. I was recently with the guy who does all the technology innovation, and it has at Microsoft. And he said, you know, now the computing power is so big that in the area of fraud, a person can't keep up with it quick enough. So we have to program into the computers how to beat fraud so that when another computer invades them, the computer can go back at the computer and get the other side of fraud. You guys know this much better than I do. But the thing that struck me there, I said, well, so what is it then that the human advantage has? He said, judgment. We don't know how to program in judgment. And judgment takes thinking. So I'd encourage you to do that today. The second thing is, I'd encourage you to think about leading on the diagonal. Now, this is important whether your company is big or your company is small. What we often do is we have vertical leadership. When I left Barclays, I had about 30,000 employees that reported to me. And we spent a lot of time on the vertical leadership. About 80% of our time normally happens. And that means the people who work for me want to impress me, and I want to think about the people that work for me, and everybody goes up and down. Well, you know what? In the new world, vertical leadership and hierarchies are not our friends. So you need to claw back a little time out of the vertical. And the horizontal is important, because in a large company, whether you're selling into one or you're operating in one, there are not sole decision makers anymore. There are peers that all influence a decision, or more importantly, veto the decision. So the question I always get is, who's the decision maker? You don't need to worry about who the decision maker is. You need to worry about who the decision blocker is. Because it's those people that are slowing down the buying and selling process. But the real way to innovate is to provide leadership at any level on the diagonal. And in financial services, this is particularly true because the influencers, the decision makers, the stakeholders are not only inside the company, they're outside the company. Regulators need to be brought in, investors, customers. And so the leading on the diagonal leadership lets you create those informal teams with you at the fulcrum point. So we all talk about that. We all talk about teaming. We all talk about the importance of it. But there's three really crucial things that have to happen for it to succeed. The first is true engagement from all members. It doesn't mean we pull together a group, and we've got people who are customer-facing there, and they're nice to have and we say goodbye. It's, are they really engaged in the process at all levels? Engaged not only with giving you what they really mean and say, but you really taking that in and listening. Information sharing and transparency. In the old world, information was power. Information shared today is power. And at a big company, that's a big statement. But that is really, really crucial, because that's what it's going to take to really get innovation through big companies, is sharing and transparency. And finally, consistent communication up, down, and across. My third recommendation would be to expect and execute for the hat trick. Now in the US, and particularly in Seattle, with the Mariner baseball team there, I must say the triple play. But really, I'm a true football fan from my time here in the UK, so I will say the hat trick. And whether you're the client or the partner, a singular solution anymore is not enough. I think there are 5, of which you must solve for 3 out of the 5. And the first one is mandatory. The first one is, whatever your solution is that you're coming with, it must improve the customer experience. Why? Because the customer, with this smartphone in hand, is every day getting more and more demanding. Every day they're on a new app. And that app is not tailored and only thought about in the customer's mind for that particular industry. It's not the fact that I can go on my Uber app and get a car when I want, anytime. It's the fact that I expect now an instantaneous car. I expect now instantaneous access to my payments. So customer expectation is moving even faster than innovation. So that means that you must have a better customer experience as a mandatory that your solution provides. The next, you need 2 out of 4. If you get 3 out of 4, all the better. If you got 4 out of 4, you have a serious winner. In financial services, saving costs. Why is saving costs so important? Because it's nearly impossible in the Western world now to move the top line. All of what we had going through the crisis of impairment has pretty much washed out of the bottom line. So that's leaving costs, and that's why there's such a huge pressure on costs. The third is to strengthen controls. I'm not going to talk a lot about the regulatory environment, but I will say this. Financial services regulated. If you are in a financial services solution that is not regulated, get ready because it will be someday. So the control environment is absolutely essential. The consumers will also tell you that. The biggest scare that they have of having financial services on their smartphone is that something crashes. It doesn't work at scale. So that idea of control environment is important, and that leads into the fourth, which is streamlining operations. And finally, as I said earlier, I think the big challenge, particularly for retail banking, is increasing revenue. And if you have a solution that can hit that as one of the winning points, that's going to be key. So what do you need to do that? Because that's a mindset that's very different. People don't think like that. They think like, I'm going to save costs. I'm going to do something operationally. I'm going to go into the control environment and risk. Well, you have to set the boldest and most audacious goal to go after. And to do that, then you have to bring all those teams along to continually challenge their existing paradigms and mindsets. And finally, you must set out the expectation. Cajole, challenge, motivate, inspire that everybody plays and nobody spectates. There can be no peanut galleries. There can be nobody that gets to sit back, be in the room, and say, yeah, that's kind of for the other guy. Because to get true innovation, it requires 100% buy-in. And finally, to join up, scale with startup mentality. So what I learned a lot when I left and went back to Seattle and started working with small businesses, kind of started my own business, is I really got the feel of this burn rate thing. You know, you don't really know burn rate in a big business. You know budgets, you know when kind of things go through, but true burn rate. When your money's going to run out, like tomorrow, and you don't have that client yet. That mentality, if laced into a big company, is powerful. Likewise, you know, you really do have the capability in small companies to do a lot. But scalability is when it gets significant. So to do that, you really have to have a culture. And the culture needs 3 elements. 1, seamless collaboration and partnership inside and outside. And you know how you know that? Because we all talk about it. The words are cheap. The way you know that is when every day somebody comes home and tells their significant other, what was the one thing that was remarkable about your day? And it's not about an internal political deal. Because you know you have a partnership, company, an approach in the culture when the thing you come home and talk about is the excitement of the customer, the excitement of the solution. The second thing is to continually prioritize your core competency. Big companies will continue to be forced to pare down to what is really core for what they're doing. And that's where the partnership can come in. And finally, perfecting the pivot at scale. I've got some great young firms that I work with in Seattle, and they're terrific. I love them. You know, you meet with them at 5 o'clock at night. They order in 3 pizzas. By the next morning, they have a new website and a whole new strategy, a whole new business model. But that's because 8 of them are sitting in a room together. Can you do that with 8,000? Can you do that with 80,000? Because to create that pivot opportunity, that constant reinvention, that constant reinventing yourself at scale is the challenge. Given all this sense of urgency for change, given what we see out there in the marketplace, I just want to leave you with one question. It's all about you. What will you, as a leader and an innovator, do? What are you going to walk out of here with today that will be different for you tomorrow than the moment when you walked in? Because that's the crucial question. Innovation, yes, it's about the technology, it's about the platforms, it's about the ideas. But the delivery of that innovation, the success of that execution, is all about the people. And it starts with each one of us in this room. Thank you very much.